Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Twice I have reviewed Psychology Today's Essential Reads. That's something that the editors have chosen as the most useful reads to find nuggets that might be particularly of benefit to viewers like you. Then I've added my amplifications. But since my previous effort, there have been 900 new essential reads that have been published. And from those, here are 12 nuggets plus my additions. The first few are about relationships. This is the quote from, I won't read you the source of the article. Yes, I will. Sorry, but the name of the article is called Sorry, but Your Ex Probably Isn't a Narcissist, subtitled, Being Selfish Doesn't Mean You Necessarily Have a Personality Disorder. And here is the quote. Narcissistic personality disorder is a relatively rare condition. The highest prevalence rates reported run around 6 to 7% for men, 4 to 5% for women. The narcissistic personality disorder results in dysfunction across contexts, occupational, social, health, legal, and so on. Many, many more people are simply selfish. That's an important distinction. We may not say that our exes are, quote, selfish and mean because that sounds like a value judgment. So instead, we say that they have narcissistic personality disorder. I'm not judging, they just meet all the diagnostic criteria I found online. Well, here's my addition. Many people label their exes with some clinical diagnosis as a way of, quote, objectively deflecting responsibility for their role in their relationship's difficulty. For example, in some relationships, one partner usually insists on his or her rectitude, not because there's narcissism going on, or that he or she is a gaslighter, or even selfishness, because that person is more often correct. Here's the next quote. 4 great ways to get your partner to follow your advice. And here's the quote. Establish your authority, but don't go overboard. That double-edged sword of humility can also apply to close relationships. If you heap too much advice because of your own perceived superiority, you'll come off as offensive. However, if you're too reticent and tentative, your words of wisdom will come across as weak. And that's the end of the quote. What I would add is that striking that balance isn't, of course, easy, especially since most of us start out with a predisposition toward one or the other, assertiveness or humility. Do you want to increase one or the other? That is, assertiveness or humility. The next quote comes from the article, 9 Questions to Assess the Health of Your Relationship. Here's the quote. The big question, do you feel like you can be yourself, that you feel loved and supported, that if problems come up they can be resolved, that life is more than just getting by and accepting, that the relationship has rewards that you can't get anywhere else and that you don't want to lose? That's the end of the quote. Well, that may be too high a bar. Many couples reasonably stay together because they believe the cost-benefit of trying to find someone better or even living alone is too risky, because the kids would suffer, or because breaking up can take so much effort and cause so much psychological pain and perhaps money that it's wiser net to stay together. The next quote comes from 10 Commandments for Partners in Couples Therapy. Here's the quote. 1. Thou shalt not blame, shame, or criticize your partner in therapy. Come to therapy each time prepared to learn what you can do to be a better partner. Ask not what your partner can do for you, but what you can do for your partner. That's good advice, in my judgment, for a second and subsequent sessions. But in a first session, before the counselor can understand the situation in full dimension, it may be helpful to air your criticisms of your partner. In addition, getting the criticisms off your chest can make it easier to listen and learn, rather than be distracted by seething blame that lurks beneath the surface. The next quote comes from New Era, New Beliefs, Singles Do Better, but the Married Feel Better. Here's the quote. Getting married does not typically result in lasting increases in happiness. Maybe in another decade, the general public will start to realize that the emotional rewards that were promised for getting married may not last. If they even materialize in the first place, they are as fleeting and as fanciful as a fairy tale. I like that statement because it injects needed counterbalance to the often frothy pronouncements, especially by vendors of wedding rings, dresses, and items for your, quote, magical day. But for my taste, that statement is a bit too harsh. Even today, when singlehood is much more accepted, many married couples are glad that they tied the knot. The next set of suggestions or essential nuggets from Essential Reads in Psychology today regarding self-improvement. This first one comes from the article, The Power of Journaling. If you're considering a writing practice, how should you begin? A good place to start might be with a gratitude journal. Research consistently shows that it helps. That's the end of the quote. Well, journaling does often lead to self-improvement because you know a lot about yourself and what you're willing and able to do. Also, it's empowering because you're retaining control rather than surrendering it to someone else. The next quote comes from an article called Surprise. Sometimes catastrophic thinking is just what you need. Here's the quote. Imagine the most disturbing circumstances, which our mind tends to do first anyway, and force yourself to contemplate the best outcome. Then consider what's most likely to happen and develop a plan for the realistic scenario. What I would add is, yes, asking yourself what you might do in a realistic worst-case scenario usually does help you realize you can survive even that. The next quote comes from an article called How to Stop Yourself from Self-Sabotaging. The quote is, replace judgment with self-compassion so you can recover more quickly, end quote. Now that may be obvious, but it's important. Remember that even highly successful people make mistakes, often big ones. What differentiates them from other people is that they tend to quickly ask themselves if there are lessons to be learned, then they forgive themselves, and then they suppress further rumination about their mistakes. The next quote comes from an article called Are Zoom Meetings Tiring You Out? Here's the quote. Consider what kind of information is better absorbed through what we now refer to as old school methods such as email. The same rationale applies to social Zoom use. Believe it or not, some people have actually gone back to using the telephone. Remember those? Yes. Ask yourself whether the added value of video is worth the cost. For example, having to dress up and to sit there in front of your computer for so long. On a cordless or a cell phone, you can move. After all, sitting is the new smoking. The next quote comes from 6 Common Ways That People Justify Unethical Behavior. Here's the quote. As long as we are motivated more by a desire to appear moral than to actually be moral, self-serving justifications are unlikely to promote behavior that serves our long-term interests or those of our organizations and communities, end quote. Yeah, we rationalize unethical behavior, for example, using, well, I need it to support my family, or other people cheat, or the company can afford it. The options for rationalization are endless, which can be a slippery slope into a life that you're embarrassed about. The next quote comes from an article called 5 Mechanisms That Drive Polarization. And the quote is, people tend to gather and make use of evidence in a way that confirms the things they want to believe, especially when the belief is tied to their identity, end quote. Yeah, it seems that today strong emotions about politics, race, gender, and redistribution are making it more likely that we are indeed subject to confirmation bias, confirming what we already believe, and dismissing of dissenting ideas, and yes, dismissive of dissenting people. Wisdom does tend to reside across the spectrum, and we do grow by asking ourselves, is it possible that an opposing view has some validity? And the final section of nuggets from the Essential Reads in Psychology today relate to substance abuse. The first comes from an article called The Price the Brain Pays, subtitle Adolescence and Drinking. Here's the quote. Like the infant brain, the developing adolescent brain is damaged by exposure to high levels of alcohol. Heavy drinking can impair a young person's memory and ability to process and relay information. Frequent binge drinking, the norm for many adolescents and young adults, can cause long-term damage to the brain's ability to make decisions, plan, organize, focus attention, control impulses, and accurately assess risk, end quote. Now, teens have long behaved unwisely, caused by a cauldron of experimentation, rebellion, and perceived immortality. What's a parent to do? Yeah, the standard advice may help. Open communication, encouraging the kid to pursue friendships with non-abusers, and an individualized level of limit setting. But especially today, many teens worry that their future will be worse than their parents. Thus, they have a desire to escape. An antidote is to help your child find a realistic career path that capitalizes on strengths, skirts weaknesses, and in which even in a tough economy, he or she will likely prevail. The following articles of mine may help. You can Google them. The first is called Work in 2021-25 to 25, and Google that in the word NEMCO. Then a similar title but a different article, work in 2021 and beyond. Google that and the word NEMCO. And careers for Generation COVID. The next quote comes from an article called How to Quit Smoking. Here's the quote. The acceptance commitment therapy app I Can Quit has cessation rates 1 year later of 28.2%, the highest ever found for an app, versus 21% for an app deployed by the U.S. Cancer Institute called Quit Guide. It taught psychological flexibility skills, which are acceptance of internal smoking triggers such as urges, thoughts, and emotions, and motivating themselves to quit via their own values, end quote. When choosing an app, though, average results across a population are only a starting place. One size does not fit all, so before choosing an app, you might consider the following smoking cessation apps. And the way you can get to those, a nice long list, is to Google, let's see, Best Quit Smoking Apps of 2020. It's on Healthline. Okay. And finally, this nugget comes from the article, 5 Ways to Keep Alcohol Use in Check During Stressful Times. The quote is, create a new routine. If you usually have a glass of wine after dinner, then start going for an evening walk instead. Now that's the sort of simple yet potent tactic I like. Nothing always works, but it's individualized, makes common sense, isn't time consuming, is side effect free, and is free. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and I especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.